Right now, on Law and Crime Special Report, Justice and Peace. Georgia man Antonio Arnello Smith has filed a lawsuit against the Valdosta Police Department for excessive use of force. Smith, a victim of mistaken identity, suffered a fractured wrist after being body slammed by police officers.
Please,
okay,
please
I got you.
Hold on. Jesus.
Plus, the Georgia legislature passed a new hate crime bill following the death of Ahmaud Arbery. Yesterday, with the announcement of indictments on the 3 men involved in Arbery's death, the DA, Joyette Holmes, announced that the bill would not apply retroactively to Arbery's case.
That indictment does have 9 charges on it.
Later, a viral story of 3 NYPD officers being poisoned by milkshakes from Shake Shack has been debunked. According to new reports, the officers lied about being sick. But why did these allegations go so far? Justice and Peace bringing you inside the movement for police reform. It's Thursday, June 25th, 2020. Afternoon, everyone. We got quite a story lined up for you today, so let's jump right in with the first one. Antonio Smith, a Georgia man, is filing a lawsuit against the local police for him being body slammed into the ground. Now, the story starts with him just being an individual walking past the Walgreens, and they're a claim of being a person who's harassing individuals, asking them for money. Now, you'll get to see the video. You can judge it for yourself. The video we're going to show you is from the angle of the officer who approaches Mr. Smith from behind after Mr. Smith is already in a conversation with another officer, gave his ID, told him what he was doing, complying with all instructions. But let's see how that situation escalated, not because of Mr. Smith, but because of the officers.
What are you doing? Oh my God!
Put your hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back like you told. Put your hands.
What are you doing? Oh, Jesus. Oh my God. Oh, please. I wasn't doing anything. Oh my God. Jesus. Oh my God. You broke my wrist. Oh my God.
Stop.
You broke my wrist. Oh my God.
Yeah, he might be broke.
Oh Jesus. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Relax.
Oh my God.
Relax.
Oh my God. Oh Jesus. Oh, what's hurt?
Yep.
Oh my God.
Yep. Hold on. Relax. We're gonna get you squared up.
Oh God. Oh Jesus. Oh, it hurt.
So, I'm gonna take it off. Hold on.
We're gonna take it off. We're gonna take it off.
Slide it up your arm.
Oh Jesus. Oh, it hurt. It hurt.
Yep.
It hurt.
I'm gonna take it off. I want you to relax. All right.
Okay. Just lay down. Okay.
Oh, sir. Flip me over on my back.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that in just a second. All right. One thing at a time. It's coming.
Do that in a second, okay?
It's coming.
I can tell you firsthand, having fractured my ankle, hand, cheekbone, wrist playing collegiate soccer, having someone do that to you is quite shocking and extremely painful. Let's bring in DeWitt Lacey, reoccurring guest at Law and Crime, civil rights attorney out in California. Thank you for waking up so early and joining us here today. DeWitt, break it down for us. What are you seeing here?
What I'm seeing is total and complete unreasonable force that's being used by a sergeant, no less. I mean, look, the department really needs to be ashamed of what happened. There was absolutely no need for this. This man was compliant with an officer he was already speaking with at the moment. The officer had asked for his ID. Mr. Smith had provided his ID. Yeah, he seemed a little annoyed by being questioned, but he was cooperative. He wasn't running away. He wasn't acting violently. There was no reason at all for the takedown. And unfortunately, I'll tell you this is the type of thing that happens all too commonly in law enforcement encounters, especially with persons of a darker hue. The problem is that most of the time they don't sustain, people who are treated like this don't sustain the type of injuries that Mr. Smith had. You know, he broke his wrist, which is, I agree, very painful. And the department needs to do something about this. I mean, they got to take some action to make sure that the message is clear, that this type of abuse is not tolerated. It's not what they train officers to do. And they expect better of people in their uniform who are to be regarded as heroes.
And I want to give our viewers a little bit more context because you can't see everything. He's being irate because moments ago he was already questioned by the officers, and he's telling that officer, I already explained to them what I was doing. He gets there, and you can see this officer, we have a different angle, he's literally lurking behind him. Now, the body camera video that we showed originally was from the officer who's bear hugging him. And if you count, it takes 6 seconds from contact to body slam. I don't know how he's supposed to put his hands behind his back in the manner in which this guy is holding him. Let's now watch another clip of when these, let's call them officers because they're wearing the uniform, but I don't think they deserve the title, when these officers realize the mistake that they've made.
Just prop it up.
Oh, Lord. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God.
Not involved.
What did you guys arrest me for?
You got a warrant.
You have a warrant here, I believe.
10-4. You have an EMS en route at 2-5. He's going to have an injury. He resisted. He's got a wrist injury from going to the ground.
Okay.
Because they pointed this guy to me.
Please.
Okay,
Please
I
take
got
me
you.
home, please.
Hold on.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God.
Sir. Okay.
Oh, Jesus.
Leave this arm flat, and that's the way we're going to leave it. For right now, just leave it like that. Any question?
All right.
That's him?
No,
Or is that the other guy?
the other guy is over there. They pointed out two different people.
Okay.
They got the guy with a warrant. This guy, I had just got in contact with him.
I was just
I thought this was the one with the warrant.
No, that's why I was trying to. No, because it's two different people. That's why I was trying to figure out if I had missed something. He's going to put his hands behind this guy. Because they pointed this guy out too. The people at the store pointed him out also.
Leave your wrist down there. Leave your wrist down there. Don't move your arm, okay?
Don't move your arm.
Why didn't you tell me something? I thought he was the one with the warrant.
No, well, I thought I had missed something. Told me.
Now, as always, I invite our viewers to go and watch the video again and again for themselves because it is difficult to watch it for the first time and see what's really happening. But let me try to break it down for you. Officer Dominic Henry is the African-American officer who is saying that there's two different people and signaling this off the side, who actually initially has that encounter with Mr. Smith. It's not until Sergeant Billy Wheeler, Patrick Barnett, and Hudson Durden, come into that situation, and one of the officers body slammed Mr. Smith. The thing that blows my mind, DeWitt, is that, it is the Sergeant Wheeler who slammed Mr. Smith to the ground. The thing that blows my mind, DeWitt, and I want you to jump in on this one, is they seem to think that this action would have been justified if he was the person who had felony warrants. That for some way that absolves this excessive force, and I can't put words to it. Can you break that down for me as to why that ludicrous notion is being floated out right now?
Because it is an old trope and tactic by law enforcement when they make mistakes, instead of owning up to the mistake and letting folks know that there was a mistake that was made, there's going to be consequences because of that mistake. They turn and try to demonize the person whom has been violently attacked or sometimes even killed. In this case, it's no different. They turn and try in some way to justify this behavior. Even if Mr. Smith had a warrant, there was no need to slam him. He wasn't evading arrest. He was talking with the officer. The officer seemed to have everything under control. The sergeant clearly not only made a tactical error, but escalated this thing to what could have potentially been a very violent confrontation with a struggle in between officers and a suspect or a subject when it wasn't necessary. And there's got to be consequence from that. And if the department doesn't have any consequence of it, they're sending a clear message that this type of behavior is okay.
And DeWitt, I agree with you, and I want to kind of echo the words of a guest we had on yesterday, Emily Galvin Almanzo, where she said, DeWitt, you and I, we do this job daily. There are things that we know that we maybe don't articulate as well because we just think it's common sense. But let's connect the dots here. flat out, African American people, especially men, are more likely to be subjected to violence than anyone else. White men, Asian men, Native American women, that's the group. Does it always result in death? No. Do we march for the deaths? Yes, because that is an instant when our anger, our frustration reaches to a point that's when you see the vitriol in response. But this, as you said, DeWitt, is par for the course. And just because he broke his wrist, we're maybe not seeing him out of outrage. And the thing that gets me is, this seems like a pretty humble man, because he only sues for $700,000, only for the expenses of his injuries. This is not a greedy man. This is not a man trying to stick it to the police. He got rightfully injured, and he's just seeking to make himself whole. This happens way too often. And when we're talking about bad apples, it's not just about the sergeant who throws him to the ground. It's about every one of those officers who think, well, if he had a felony warrant, maybe this would have been justified. Even the chief came out saying that, well, we got the right guy, just not the guy with the warrant. How do you break apart that culture, though, DeWitt? Because that, and you can see the response here from the chief. How do you break that apart as a culture to tell people, no, warrant or not, that's not what you do? How do we attack that?
I think a lot of that has to come, and I think that's an excellent question, Brian, but I think a lot of that has to come from a culture outside of the department, because right now, law enforcement is beholden to this notion of the thin blue line, if you will, and that they have to stick together no matter what and have their brothers in blue, in this case, tan and greens, back. And one thing that will change that is public resentment. When the public understands and appreciates that this is a common and regular occurrence, and that people are mistreated like this for no reason other than the color of this person's skin, in my mind. I think had this been, a white man, I don't believe the sergeant would have come up and slammed him to the ground. There was just no need for it. Furthermore, I'll say this, even though the black officer was talking with Mr. Smith, I thought quite amicably, he did not have, if you will, the guts or the gumption to say, hey, look, Sarge, I got it. And part of that is because the culture in police departments and law enforcement departments around America is you don't challenge this authority. And even if they're doing something wrong, you go ahead with it and you talk about it afterwards. This is what leads to countless injuries when they are unnecessary. This is what has led to George Floyd's death, I will add, is because officers realized there was something wrong, but they were too scared and too frightened to do something about it for fear there would be retaliation from the department itself.
Yeah. I mean, thank God he landed on his wrist and not his neck. This would have been a completely different story, but for an inch here or an inch there. We're going to continue with our other stories after this break here on Justice and Peace. All right, so on to our next story, and that being what Georgia has done post Ahmaud Arbery. Now, we've been told that there has been a bill that is going towards the Governor Kemp, to be signed, that they are adding hate crime charges to the statutes of Georgia. However, those charges will not affect the recent indictments of the two McMichaels and Mr. William Bryan, who are now been indicted for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Now, I've got DeWitt Lacey with us here now. Talk to us about ex post factos, how the Georgia laws are moving towards having hate crimes. I believe there's only 3 states now that do not have hate crimes in the book. I believe it's South Carolina, Arkansas, and Wyoming. Georgia being the fourth last one to kind of drop that status. How do you make of this movement towards hate crimes are now a thing in Georgia?
I think it is a very significant move by the state to enact this type of law. Of course, these type of laws are regular in many other parts of the country, and Georgia is a little late to the party, if you will, in making sure that people's rights are not violated, especially with regards to race. However, it does not apply retroactively. That's commonplace. If there's a new law in place, it is not going to apply retroactively, even to ongoing litigation that's happening. So that's not a surprise necessarily there. What would be a surprise if the DOJ did something about this? Now, there are clearly racial implications in this killing of Ahmaud Arbery. And although the district attorney doesn't have the ability to file a criminal action against these guys under some hate crime statute, because there was none at the time that the indictment was filed, the Justice Department can, and they can take federal action. But I think we'd be surprised to see the DOJ really take that type of stance, especially considering who's in charge of that office.
Now, DeWitt, I want to show you the DA Holmes' response to the indictment, some of the hate crime charges, and I want to see if that changes your calculus as to whether or not the DOJ would jump in here. Let's take a listen.
Speak to the hate bill crime passing the House yesterday and being probably signed into law by the governor. Is that retroactive? Will it affect this case?
It is not retroactive. So it has, as you stated, been passed by both houses of the legislature, has not been signed by the governor yet. If this bill had been signed prior to the incident date of this case, then it might be something that we'd be able to look at for this case. But in that it was not, it will not be something that we are able to consider under state law.
Now, DeWitt, you said during the break this is an ex post facto issue. This is as old as the term ex post facto, which is a Latin term, pretty much after the fact. It's pretty par for the course for all statutes and law. Do you agree or disagree? Do you think we should maybe not apply that here? What are your thoughts?
I think it's got to apply here. And there's other means and mechanisms to get this hate crime prosecuted. And I did take note that the district attorney says, we, and very specifically, and I think she chose those words carefully to say, we are not going to do anything about or in regards to hate crime because we cannot at this time. However, I think what she was signaling to was the United States Department of Justice saying, but you can, Department of Justice. I just don't know that the Department of Justice has the will to do something like that, considering the stances that they've taken on police reform and or investigations of police abuse throughout the country since this administration came into sitting.
All right. Now, switching gears just quickly before we get to the end of the show, we've got Bob Bianchi waiting for Keeping the Peace just after this. A few NYPD officers from the Bronx came down to Manhattan during the protests because they needed additional officers there. And in their break, they had a drink from Shake Shack. And this was the initial story we heard after they took a few sips of their shake from Shake Shack.
Officers could be seen collecting evidence, including bags of food and milkshakes. 3 police officers on protest patrol said they felt sick last night after taking a drink from a milkshake. One reported the shake had a bleach smell. They were taken to the hospital, treated, and released.
There was a whole criminal investigation to this, DeWitt. And I know that we can laugh after the fact, but I do not believe that actual poisoning of police officers is a laughing matter. But I think that when you see officers take this little bit of information, because it started with 3 officers, and then worked up the chain all the way to the PBA, and see how they radicalize that against Shake Shack and against, I think, even all New Yorkers to say that we would do such a thing to our officers. I think that shows the systemic problems within this organization of how a simple lie can grow to such a huge catastrophe. What are some of your thoughts? Because for me, this sounds like a bit of a false report, and I'm looking to see who is going to be punished for this.
Well, I think the evidence is clearly suggesting that this is a false report. But I think more importantly, what it goes to, Brian, is it's a tone-deaf response for the police department. They're looking for sympathy here. They're feeling attacked because a lot of folks are speaking out about injustices that come as a result of police abuse and misconduct, and they don't believe that's fair. A lot of folks in law enforcement believe that they should be criticized like they are being criticized right now. And this, in my mind, is the story about being poisoned by some Shake Shack milkshake was a way to garner some type of public sympathy and rally support behind law enforcement officers. But it's a tone-deaf response. And I'll say this to you, law enforcement community. What everybody in America is asking you to do right now is not to make excuses or justify police violence and or misconduct, but what folks are asking you to do is weed out all the bad apples you say exist. Stop hiding behind the badge. Get these folks out of your department, out of your profession, because they are dishonoring the practice and profession that you go to work for every day. And that's what America wants. They don't want stories about, oh, well, we're being attacked and we're being hurt. They want you to get rid of the so-called bad apples.
I fully agree. And DeWitt, I'm going to follow your lead in giving a message as well that I tell to young defense attorneys and everyone who works in the criminal justice system. You can't find a lawyer, and we can even go outside the criminal justice system, a lawyer, a judge, a court officer, a nurse who has not been denigrated by the people they're representing. And what I tell young attorneys, you're going to be called all kind of names. I've been called the N-word by my client. I've been recently married, so they know that, and they'll talk derogatorily about my wife, and not even knowing her. I've been swung at, I've been spat at. But you know what I do when I took an oath to represent clients in this kind of way? I take to this podium, I speak to the judge, I represent my client, and if the judge wants to release me because my client's calling me the N-word and feels that I can't represent them, I do so. But I do not throw my client under the bus because at the end of the day, I'm a professional. Police departments, please do the same. Because I know you're going to be disrespected. I know you're not going to be treated well. But this is not a popularity contest where you're only going to interact with people who are going to love you. I'm sorry. You still have to do your job. Just like I know you do it, just like I know that our next host has done as a civil rights attorney and prosecutor, just like I know as our next guest has done as a former police officer, you've got to step up or step out. Because if you can't do this job, it's not for you. DeWitt, I'll give you the final thoughts. We have 30 seconds to go.
I think you're absolutely right. Look, one of my great friends, Roger Clark, has said to me many times, look, if this job is too much for you, I agree. If it's too much for you, then maybe you should be a plumber.
Exactly. Thank you very much, DeWitt, for your time. We're going to kick it off to Keeping the Peace with Bob Bianchi after this. Everyone enjoy your day. I'll see you tomorrow.